Alright, I am back with another video, and today we have another sort of simpler build. But I wanted to take a simple build, but do it in a way that gives it a fun and unique kind of gameplay loop with a lot of options. And there was a couple of things that I definitely wanted to explore, because I haven't done in a while. I knew I wanted to use Eldritch Knight Fighter, but I didn't know exactly how I wanted to use it. A lot of people don't see Eldritch Knight as worth it a lot of the time, compared to just playing something like, you know, a full spellcaster, maybe just a regular fighter, or maybe even a warlock. Eldritch Knight. Eldritch. Okay. Then I kind of got the idea, and you could probably see where I'm going with this. I'm going to try to build a warlock without building a warlock. Because you see, Eldritch Knight Fighter gives us access to quite a few things that can actually create a really unique and interesting playstyle that, well, Warlock can obviously achieve something similar, and we will be doing some things as well as a Warlock could. We'll be able to have a bunch of new options that create a completely different playstyle. Well, I say completely different. It's quite a different playstyle, which has a little bit more freedom in the types of equipment you can use. So while this build is quite simple, the things we're going to be doing on a level-to-level basis are actually going to be quite specific in order to get the exact kind of combination that I am personally looking for here, but feel free to change up this build a bit, as there is options for different multi-classing dips here and there if you want to, but otherwise I think this build is going to work out pretty damn nicely, and I think it actually really just showcases the strengths of Eldritch Knight that a lot of people tend to look over. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. Starting off, we are a fighter, surprise, surprise, but this is going to give us a lot of things that we want. Access to all weapons and armor, concentration saving throw proficiency, which is going to be important, as well as a fighting style. We do get second wind as well, and because we're going to be taking quite a high level in fighter, we are going to be able to use second wind quite effectively, so that is actually a nice bit of healing as a bonus action. But anyways, we do get a fighting style, and you can choose whichever fighting style you want, any weapon under the sun you want to use, you can. It is completely up to you. I decided to go for a route that most warlocks probably wouldn't go for most of the time, because when I thought about a build that's similar to this, I thought about like the left-handed spellsword type deal with a warlock, but since I kind of wanted to buck that trend a little bit, I've decided to go with great weapon fighting, going for a two-handed weapon fighting style here, and as such I wanted to go with great weapon fighting, but dueling if you want to use a rapier, defense can also be good if you want a bit more armor class, archery if you want to make this a ranged build, you have a ton of options. You can even do dual wielding anyway if you want to go with two weapon fighting, but I decided to go that I wanted to make this an Eldritch Warlock type fighter, but I wanted to be able to use big weapons such as a halberd or a greatsword or a glaive or a maul. Honestly, use whatever weapon you like. I decided to go for the halberd that I did because it's kind of going to fit the theme that I'll be kind of getting into in a minute, but you'll see. Next up, ability scores. You can kind of mix and match these as well as you like. We are using heavy armor with this build, which again, a warlock on its own would not normally be able to do. So I've decided to kind of leave dexterity at 10 because we don't really need it unless you really want that initiative, but there's other ways you can bump that up. And I've decided to go with the following stats. Strength at 16 because it is going to be our main attacking stat. Constitution at 14. I mean, I might like this a bit higher, but honestly, we're going to be taking a couple of feats with this build, and we're going to have quite a few ability score improvements anyway, so you can mess around with that as you like. Intelligence is at 16 because it is going to be our main spellcasting modifier, as we are going to be an Eldritch Knight. Wisdom is at 8 because we don't need it, and Charisma is at 10, so we just have that little bit, but not really enough for it to be relevant. But otherwise, it should still be fine. Next up, skill proficiencies. I actually recommend that you play this build as a Dark Urge, because again, I've kind of gone for this like idea of a fallen knight, someone who was a noble to start, which is why I've chosen the noble background in case you don't go Dark Urge, but if you do decide to play this as a Dark Urge, which I highly recommend, in fact I would say this is a Dark Urge build, you were going to get a lot of stuff out of this. You're going to get some cool equipment, you're going to get the idea that like you are this person of like noble birth who got a knighthood and was a valiant servant of the people who slowly descended into some sort of madness through the actual Dark Urge itself, or whatever else you want to flavor it as in your playthrough, which is why we're kind of playing into this like idea that we're going to be using some kind of nasty magic as we play as this Eldritch Knight and get into some interesting combos with it. So I actually do recommend this as a Dark Urge build, as again someone who just kind of slowly descends into craziness over time and starts using tactics that maybe, let's just say, a more honourable knight would not use. But regardless, let's continue. Athletics and Intimidation are going to be my proficiencies of choice, because I did go with the Noble background. Again, if you're not a Dark Urge, you're going to get Persuasion and History. But if you do go with the Dark Urge, you're going to get the Haunted one background, giving you Medicine and Intimidation, so you will need to swap out Intimidation for something else, maybe Perception or Survival or something like that. I always like to have Athletics though, because that's going to help with things like throwing, because obviously Eldritch Knight can throw returning weapons, so there's a few reasons to go with stuff like that. But regardless, let's continue. Next up at Fighter level 2, we're going to get Action Surge. I mean, you all know what Action Surge does. It's just going to allow us to attack even more. Trust me, we're going to be attacking a lot. Next up at Fighter level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and surprise, surprise, we're going Eldritch Knight. I mean, what else were we going to do? Eldritch Knight is going to give us access to a bunch of things right off the bat at level 3. We're going to get Weapon Bond, allowing us to ritually bind a weapon to our main hand. That weapon cannot be knocked out of our hand, and if we throw it, it returns to us. So if you wanted to make a throwing weapon build, mixed in with all the spell casting, you absolutely can. It would actually be a pretty damn fun way to play this style of combat. So get a spear. Hell, if you want to use the Saluna or Shah spears, you can. In fact, the Shah spear would actually probably play pretty nicely with this build if you went for the Eversight ring and such like that. But regardless, there's a ton of different weapons you could use here. If you want to use throwing weapons, you can. If you don't, that's fine. You have so many different ways of building this and customizing it to exactly what your kind of play of, like, fantasy of play is. Just have some fun with it. But Weapon Bond is nice because it's a bit different from Pact Weapon, whereas you can't even throw the damn thing. Weapon Bond, you can, which I think is quite nice. Next up, cantrips. You're going to get to pick a couple of cantrips, and I would recommend taking maybe at least one damage cantrip and one utility cantrip here. For the damage cantrip, I would recommend Ray of Frost. Now, I know Firebolt is right there, and yes, technically Firebolt is going to be doing more damage than Ray of Frost, but fire is more often resisted, as well as the fact that we are going to be getting another 1d10 cantrip later. You can probably already guess what it is. So I think Ray of Frost actually does have a lot of value at this level. It's going to do 1d8 of cold damage, which is still extremely respectable, as well as it's going to reduce your target's movement speed by 3 meters. As someone who is going to be using both cantrips, spells, and melee attacks, being able to reduce an enemy's movement speed so they're not as likely to be able to run away and get out of your melee range is actually going to be pretty damn valuable. So I prefer Ray of Frost here for getting a bit of damage and a bit of utility all in one small package. Your next spell can be whatever you like. Again, I recommend taking some form of utility cantrip if you can. If you're playing a high elf, you will get access to extra cantrips that use your intelligence if you like, if you want to go that route. I made a tiefling, because I haven't made a tiefling in a while. And I'm playing Azariel Tiefling, which gets Thaumaturgy, which I thought kind of made sense for this build. So, since I have Thaumaturgy, I probably won't be taking friends here, since I'll mainly be focusing on Intimidation checks with this build. So I would say either grab Mage Hand or Minor Illusion. I'm probably going to grab Mage Hand. Next up, we do get to pick 2 Abjuration or Evocation spells from the Wizard spell list, and I'm going to be taking the 2 kind of bog standard ones. Shield, for obvious reasons, one of the best utility spells in the game, giving us way more defensive options, as well as Magic Missile, allowing us to deal guaranteed damage each time with a spell. It's going to give us force damage, which is not very often resisted, and it's a great overall spell. It's going to be great for your ranged option, and it's going to fit the theme of the build overall. Again, force damage is kind of a theme here. We also get to pick any wizard spell now from the expanded spell list, and I'm going to recommend you take an enchantment spell, either Sleep or Tasha's Hideous Laughter. Sleep is great, especially at the early game levels where you're going to be able to put enemies to sleep up to a combined total of 24 hit points, but I wouldn't recommend it so much in the late game. If you're going to take it now, you're going to want to replace it later, because Eldritch Knight, like other spellcasters, can replace their spells at certain levels. So Sleep, because we only get level 2 spell slots with Eldritch Knight, Sleep isn't going to be so great in the late game, so I would probably recommend Tasha's Hideous Laughter instead, because this is going to work no matter what. You can leave a target prone with laughter without the ability to get up, and for those of you that don't know, prone means that the enemy cannot take actions, bonus actions, or reactions, and has disadvantage on strength and dex saves, as well as attacks against them will always have advantage as long as you are within 3 meters. This means that we're going to be able to get consistent advantage on our fighter build. And if we're getting advantage on a fighter, you know what that probably means, but we'll get to that later. So I would definitely recommend Tasha's Hideous Laughter for now. Next up, at Fighter level 4, you're going to gain access to your first feat as well as another spell. Now this one's only from the Abjuration kind of spell and Evocation spell list. Unfortunately, However, I'm going to show you guys a trick to these kinds of things. This works with both Eldritch Knight and Arcane Trickster that you probably didn't know. Let's say we pick up Witch Bolt. Perfectly fine spell. We don't really have a powerful concentration option at this point other than Tasha's, so if you wanted a more damage dealing concentration option that you could just tick over every turn, Witch Bolt does exist. However, if we take Witch Bolt now, and then at the next level you can replace it, I'm just going to give you an example now, you can change it to any wizard spell, not just from Abjuration or Evocation. So as long as you're replacing spells at each level, you actually have a lot more options to go with. I'm not going to replace a spell yet, because you can't officially replace a spell until you already have it in your spell list, so we have to go to the next level to be able to do that. But I figured I would point that out, as it is going to come out throughout the build. But first up, a feat. And you have choices here. I'm going to say that at this point, I would recommend grabbing an ability score improvement and bumping up that strength, as it is still going to be kind of our main damage dealer up until now. Plus, you can do arcane acuity shenanigans as well, kind of around the level 4 to 5 mark if you're kind of heading into Act 2. So I would say that getting strength now is also pretty good, and I do recommend the Potion of Everlasting Vigor to bump this up to a 20 to truly optimize this build. I tested this build at 18 strength and it still worked fine, but you may want that Potion of Everlasting Vigor to kind of make sure that you've got that maxed out strength, and then you can put more points into other stats. But there you go. I would say take this ability score improvement now. We can get some more of the fun stuff in a minute. Next up, a fight to level 5, we're going to be getting extra attack, which is great. I will also point out that since I'm playing as Ariel Tiefling, we do get Searing and Branding Smite as part of our racial features once per long rest. They do use our Charisma though, so unless you're doing Arcane Acuity shenanigans, you're probably not going to get a lot out of them, but I figured I would point them out regardless. Play any race you like with this build though. Orc, high elf or high half elf would also work really nicely. Basically anything that gives you a little bit more magic can also be quite nice, so feel free to pick and choose what you like. I did forget to replace that spell, so I'm just gonna show this off now. Again, as much as I do kind of like the idea of using Witch Bolt on this build, the fact that you have to use your action every turn when we're a fighter and we kind of want to do other stuff, I'm gonna say we're gonna grab something else here. And again, it can be any spell from this list. If you feel like Sleep is going to be useful to you, you can pick that up. Again, it's another enchantment spell, which will synergize with some stuff that we're gonna get later. But as for all the other spells that you have here, you've got a ton of utility options. Long Strider and Enhanced Sleep are always great. Expeditious Retreat to dash as a bonus action could be useful to you. It's entirely up to you. You could go for something like Color Spray if you want another illusion spell to potentially blind creatures, which could give you advantage in another way. If you want to go with Clothing on this build for whatever reason, instead of Heavy Armor, which I personally don't recommend, Mage Armor does exist. Find Familiar if you want an Animal Companion. There is just so much you could bloody do with this. Hell, Grease is another great option, as we actually will have a way of preventing ourselves from falling prone. So Grease could actually be a really solid option, as well as something like Ice Knife if you just want another big damage dealer that can create ice surfaces that enemies can also slip on. There are so many ways you can go about this. In fact, I think I am going to take Ice Knife. I've just talked myself into it. But of course, because we're level 6 of Fighter, we do gain access to another bonus feat. And I'm going to say at this point we're going to get one of the main things for this build, because it's going to synergize with level 7 immediately after. We're going to pick up Spell Sniper, and you have a choice. I'm personally going with Eldritch Blast because I'm trying to do this Warlock, but not actually a Warlock thing. Eldritch Blast is obviously going to be probably our main damage cantrip now, allowing us to do, at this level, 2d10 force damage to a single creature, or we could spread those d10s across multiple creatures. At the end, being able to fire 3 beams for 3d10 total. But if you wanted to kind of go into more of a kind of interesting, like, melee Mortal Kombat inspired style, pick up Thorn Whip. Thorn Whip is going to work with this build anyway quite nicely, and you'll be able to pull creatures into melee range of you so you can start doing your melee attacks. Could be a fun and interesting unique thing, so again, it's kind of a pick your poison situation. And the great thing about Spell Sniper is that Spell Sniper as a feat will use your spellcasting modifier from your class. It says Charisma there, but that's not actually true. This will use our intelligence because we're an Eldritch Knight fighter, so we get the full power of Eldritch Blast here. Obviously, the downside to this is that we're not playing a Warlock, meaning that we're not going to get Agonizing or Repelling Blast, so technically Eldritch Blast isn't as strong as it could be. So you could instead pick up Firebolt, and then we could use something like the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation to bump up with our Intelligence modifier, if you feel like that's a bit better. But I used Eldritch Blast in my testing and it worked really, really well, so I'm going to be picking it up here. At fighter level 7, we're going to immediately get the thing that synergizes with the spell sniper feat that we just took, War Magic. You've honed your body and magic for war. After you cast a cantrip, you can make a weapon attack using a bonus action. Now, before you say anything, I did test this a long time ago. Thief Rogue does not work with this. You do not get an extra attack. This is a once per turn thing. So as much as I would love for Thief Rogue to have worked with this, it unfortunately doesn't. But that's why left-handed spell swords exist, because that does work. But War Magic's still going to feel really, really great, because think about it. You can cast Eldritch Blast, getting 3d10 of force damage off across multiple enemies or a single enemy. That's kind of like doing 3 attacks. And then you can use your bonus action to make a big melee weapon attack right after. Plus, if you've got other cantrips that may be able to do some funky shenanigans, like Ray of Frost, preventing enemies from moving away from you, help throw on the Snowburst Ring to make it so they fall prone and such like that, you can actually get some pretty unique and interesting combinations. But once we get to the equipment section later, I do have a lot of ways of kind of mixing and matching casting spells and weapon attacks with our action and bonus action. We'll be able to have quite a lot of freedom about choosing which order we want to do what, being able to go for certain Nova rounds of damage by being able to cast our cantrips as a bonus action instead. But like I say, we will get to that. But otherwise, more magic is going to be a really fun feature. Yes, you're trading out extra attack, but like I say, with things like Action Surge, you can kind of do this and then go for your full round of attacks if you want. It's all about just mixing and matching and having a bit of fun. And like I say, I'll get into the full combos a bit later. Next up, we do get to pick level 2 spells at this point, and you have a ton of options to you. Want to throw on the Eversight Ring on this build and use Darkness for Darkness Devil's Sight shenanigans? Yep, not making that mistake again. For Darkness Devil's Sight shenanigans, you could do that if you want to throw on the Eversight Ring, and again, still get that kind of Warlock vibe, again, without actually playing a Warlock. And there's also the ability to take another big damage dealing spell here, like Scorching Ray, but again, I might be doing some replacing in a minute. Just you wait and see. At level 8, we are going to gain access to another expanded spell list spell, and look at the options we have here. So many amazing spells. Misty Step, Hold Person, Crowd of Madness, Cloud of Daggers, Blindness, Enlarge Reduce, you can have some fun with that one. There's so many interesting options here, but let me show you exactly what I'm going to go for. Of course, Hold Person. One of the best enchantment spells we can pick up here, as well as the fact that it's going to allow all of our attacks to always be critical hits. Again, if we're picking up Great Weapon Master in a minute, which you totally have the option to do, this can be a seriously powerful spell to have. I am also going to be replacing a spell here. Now, it's up to you kind of to decide what you think is useful to you and what you don't think is useful to you. At this point, you might think Ice Knife isn't so fun anymore. I personally don't think Scorching Ray is needed on this build. I think if I'm going to be using my level 2 spell slots, I want to get that powerful utility, and if I want to get damage, I'm just going to cast Eldritch Blast on one of my cantrips. So I think we're going to take Scorching Ray and replace that with Blindness to basically have a non-concentration option for blinding a creature to guarantee our attack rolls will have advantage against it. We have a lot of ways of getting advantage with this build, which means Great Weapon Master synergy is going to be pretty paramount. Speaking of, let's grab that now, shall we? Now, you may be thinking, but hold on, our intelligence is still at 16. Isn't our spell save DC going to be crap? Kind of, but as I said, we'll be able to do some shenanigans with Arcane Acuity, which is perfect for a build like this, to be able to bring that up. But don't worry, we will still be bumping up intelligence a bit later. In fact, you can bump up intelligence now and take Great Weapon Master at level 12 if you want. But let's do this. Great Weapon Master. Whenever you land a critical hit or kill a target with a melee weapon attack, you can make another melee weapon attack as a bonus action, and of course, you gain an additional 10 damage at the cost of a -5 attack roll penalty. But again, we have a lot of ways of getting advantage, so we're going to be able to offset this penalty pretty goddamn consistently. But at the end of the day, if you feel like you're having trouble managing that kind of aspect of the build, then feel free to slap on the risky ring and just have advantage all the time. Entirely up to you. Next up at Fighter level 9, we're actually going to get Indomitable, which synergizes with this build in a pretty insane way. You have become as durable as an Iron Golem. Whenever you fail a saving throw, you can roll again using the new result instead. That is any saving throw, including concentration saving throws. So, now if we have a powerful concentration spell that we're maintaining concentration on, like for example, Hold Person, or Crown of Madness, which we can get now actually, which I will be doing because I want it, or even Darkness, you have Darkness as well. I might get rid of Ice Knife at this point and just go for Crown of Madness, yeah, something along those lines, right? Then, And that's also what I meant by, you know, the kind of dishonorable tactics of the Fallen Knight, you know, Crown of Madness, hold person, all very trickstery type things. But now Indomitable is going to allow us to succeed the saving throw to keep that spell up whenever we need to. Because yes, our concentration is a little bit on the low side, which you can bump up if you'd like. But otherwise we do have concentration saving throw proficiency, as well as Indomitable. We're going to be able to keep that important concentration spell up if we need to. Now, next up at level 10, we get another really cool feature that's going to synergize nicely with this build. Eldritch Strike. Whenever you hit a creature with a weapon attack, it has disadvantage on its next saving throw against a spell you cast before the end of your next turn. All of a sudden, our lower intelligence modifier isn't so much of a big deal, because now we just attack and then cast our... and then we get to cast our, you know, spell like Hold Personal or something, with immediately getting a higher chance to hit. I know I completely butchered the wording on that, but you get my point. Basically, attack with a weapon, they have disadvantage on the save, hit them with a powerful concentration spell, and all of a sudden you're off to the races. Now you may be thinking, but we have to wait till the next turn to be able to do that. You'll see. At this level, we're going to have a piece of equipment that you probably already know what it is, but it's going to work quite nicely. We get another cantrip at this level. Choose whatever you like. Rocking Grasp, it's another melee cantrip. I don't know, Firebolt. Could be a fun alternative to Eldritch Blast if you just want to hit them with the Ignis, which I've been told is like similar to the term for sneezing in Dutch. Thank you, Gold. There's a ton of different ways you could go about this. Hell, if you want another illusion spell, pick up Minor Illusion as a cantrip. Entirely up to you. We are also going to gain access to another level 2 spell at this point. And again, not really sure what I would pick up here. It's entirely up to you. Just grab something that strikes your fancy. And now at level 11 of Fighter, we're going to get an additional extra attack, meaning that now we can make 3 attacks per turn with our weapon. This is a big advantage over Warlock, as they would only be able to get a maximum of 2 without multi-classing shenanigans, and even then that doesn't work on honor mode, whereas this will. So overall, I think this is a pretty cool thing to get at this level. We also do get to pick another level 2 spell, and again, it's entirely up to you what you want to grab here. We've kind of exhausted, I would say, the important options for this build, so I'm just going to grab Chromatic Orb because I like it. But again, we can train out something like Scorching Ray again for a different spell if we so choose. Something with a bit of utility would be quite nice at this point in the build. Something like Mirror Image if you want more armor class. Something like Misty Step to teleport across the map and be quite versatile, whether you want to be at range to fire Eldritch Blasts, or you want to be close up and personal to be able to get off those big melee hits. I would say Misty Step is probably your best option, but feel free to shop around and find something that you like. And finally, at Fighter level 12, you do have the option to replace your spell one more time. It's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. You can go for anything, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to go back to what I had originally. And then we do also have the ability to grab another feat, ability score improvement, whatever have you here. I am going to go for an ability score improvement, and it's up to you if you want to bump up your constitution for a bit more HP and slightly better concentration saves, or if you want to bump up that intelligence for a better spell save DC without item shenanigans, which is probably what I'm going to do. And it's not entirely because you get a nice flat 100 HP at max level here. That kind of just tickles my brain a bit. And that is the build. And what are you getting out of it? Well, at the end of the day, you're still playing a level 12 fighter, which is one of the strongest things in the game, regardless, multiple weapon attacks and all that. However, you get the utility of being able to use a bunch of different interesting spells. Either Eldritch Blast or Thorn Whip are going to be really fun and cool additions to the fighter playstyle, as well as the fact that you can do a thrown weapon playstyle with your ritual bind weapon, as well as being able to do a bunch of battlefield shenanigans, gaining advantage in a ton of different ways, augmenting you and your allies' damage, being able to go for darkness stuff if you really want to. There's so many different ways you can kind of augment your playstyle with Eldritch Knight, and it's going to feel fun and fluid, especially once we get into the equipment. So let's get into that. For the progression of this build, it's going to feel pretty good because you're just literally playing an Eldritch Knight fighter, and that's about it. So the actual level progression is going to feel really, really good as you go throughout the game, and picking up the various pieces of equipment as you go is going to feel really, really nice. But anyways, let's get into it. So, first up, the Halberd of Vigilance. I picked this for a few reasons. One, it's a nice, big, two-handed heavy weapon that we get to use as a fighter, which is nice, and it comes with force damage built into it, and of course, force damage is kind of a theme here. We also gain a +1 bonus to initiative rolls and advantage on perception checks, which is great. And whenever we make an attack roll as a reaction, you can make it with advantage. So that helps if enemies are trying to escape. We can use our polearm's long reach to get them. If you don't care about taking that last ability score improvement to intelligence, and you just want to use maybe the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, like I have here as an early game option for you, you could pick up Polearm Master and really take advantage of this. But of course, any weapon in the game is available to you, and I can't really say I wouldn't recommend any of them, except maybe, I don't know, a basic level dagger. So many weapons will work with this build, and I think you will have a ton of fun just picking and choosing what works for you. Again, with the multiple fighting styles, you're going to have a lot of options available to you, so pick and choose your poison. I mean, I think a lot of people would probably want to go with dual wielding on this build, but mix and match, have a fun time with it. Do what feels right for you. So, I've also got a bow on this build. I've got the Titan String Bow here as an early game weapon because it uses your strength modifier, but unfortunately our dex is a bit low, so you're not going to get a ton of usage out of this, but if you do have advantage to hit your targets through things like blindness, it should still work. However, what I will say is once you're in Act 3, I'd definitely recommend picking up the Deadshot, because we're not really going to use the bow on this build that much, for Deadshot will reduce the number we needed to roll a critical hit. This will stack with Spell Sniper, that means with our cantrips we roll a critical hit on an 18 or higher, which means Eldritch Blast is going to be critting quite a lot, which is actually quite fun for us, and our regular weapon attacks will still have a higher chance to crit anyway, so that, I think it's a pretty standard option when you get to Act 3. But let's get into the rest of the equipment. For our helmets, you've got a few options here. As I said, we have the Helmet of Arcane Acuity as a great early game option. You're going to want to pick this up in Act 2 as soon as you get the opportunity, because Arcane Acuity makes it so that whenever you hit with a weapon attack, you gain a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls and spell difficulty class for each remaining turn. That means that as long as we keep doing our melee hits, which remember we get a hell of a lot of, if you wanted to go with like a full action surge turn, that could be a +6 to spell attack to spell save DC, which means all of your spells are going to succeed pretty much. You're going to have a pretty good time using this, I would say, in the early game. However, there are a couple, or I say early mid game, but there are going to be a couple of other options in Act 3 that I think would be fun and flavorful for this build. Again, if we're playing this like Fallen Knight who's a Dark Urge, the Bone Spike helmet can be really fun. We're not going to have the whole rage aspect to it, but it is going to give us a +2 to intimidation, which is really, really nice, as well as menacing attack, which we can use once per turn, which is going to deal extra damage and possibly frighten targets, which giving them disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they cannot move away from you, which means they're going to be taking a massive amount of damage and potentially getting even more status effects inflicted on them. I think flavor-wise, getting menacing attack here is actually really, really fun, but if you don't necessarily agree with that and you want another fun power building option, grab Savarok's Horned Helmet. You're going to gain Dark Vision up to a range of 3 meters, and you will further reduce the critical hit threshold, meaning that our spells will critical hit on a 17 or higher, and our melee attacks will critical hit on an 18 or higher. You also cannot be frightened or afflicted with other emotion-altering conditions, which I think does make sense lore-wise for this build. You also do get a buff to your Constitution saving throws, which means you have a higher chance to succeed your concentration saves on spells. Overall, all 3 of these options are going to have powerful effects to bring to the table, so just choose your favourite. As for your cloak, I've gone for the Nymph Cloak, giving us access to a high-level enchantment spell, Dominate Person, which in my opinion, I love for this build. Unfortunately, we can only use it once per long rest, so I think once you've got your long rest usage out of this, especially if you're playing a Dark Urge, switch to the Deathstalker Mantle to get those invisibility shenanigans, or maybe just plop on something simple like the Cloak of Protection, whatever strikes your fancy, but the Nymph Cloak is going to feel extremely fun on this build because again it's an enchantment spell. Next up, I have the Hellgloom Armour, which is actually the flawed Helldusk armor in game. I don't know why it's named differently when I add it with the mods that I use to make these videos. Regardless, it's the exact same functionality. When you are hit with a foe within 2 meters, it might take a retaliatory bit of fire damage. You also take 1 less piercing damage. Also, it looks absolutely badass. This isn't even dyed, this is just what the armor looks like, and I think it works perfectly for this build, and you get it pretty early on into Act 2. However, if you do want a straight upgrade once you go to Act 3, just grab the Armor of Persistence, a flat 20 armor class, all incoming damage is reduced by 2, and you also gain Resistance and Blade Ward, giving you a bit better saving throws, as well, which is going to help with concentration saves, as well as resistance to slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning damage. So overall, probably the better option. Dyed in Furnace Black and Red, it does look pretty damn good otherwise. But I do prefer the Hellgloom Armor, but I'll keep this on for now. I prefer the Hellgloom Armor looks-wise. That's just me. Next up for our gloves, I've gone for the quick spell gloves. This is where we're going to get a bit more fluidity with what we can cast on with what resource, be it our action or our bonus action. Cantrips that cost an action can cost a bonus action instead, once per short rest. So this would give us the ability to, if we really wanted to go absolutely Nova, attack 3 times in a turn, use these, bonus action Eldritch Blast, action Surge, 3 attacks again. That is a huge turn, especially with Great Weapon Master and all that sort of thing. However, there are other ways, perhaps if you don't want to just use Eldritch Blast on your bonus action, and I'll get to that in a minute. However, there are other glove options for you, especially in the early game. For an early game option, the Daredevil gloves make perfect sense, giving you a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls, which is great. That's going to work great for our cantrips, as well as we can make ranged spell attacks as melee spell attacks, meaning that if we're in melee range, Eldritch Blast isn't going to take a disadvantage, which is pretty damn important. But I feel like you can reasonably swap these out later on once you get some different options, but the Daredevil gloves are going to be pretty damn good all the way up until Act 3, especially since you can get them so early. Another cool option though would be the Arachnir Braces. It would allow you to cast Mage Hand as a bonus action, you'd get a small bonus to your saving throws, and you'd get access to telekinesis every short rest, and as long as you keep concentrating on it, you can use it again and again and again. I don't know, I just felt like having another spell did make sense for this build, so this is also a fun option if you want to go down that route. But I do quite like the quick spell gloves for this build, personally. Next up, you've got quite a few different options for your boots. We've got the Boots of Striding, which is probably my personal pick, because whenever you cast a spell that requires concentration, which we're going to be doing a lot, you get a bit of momentum, meaning you get a bit more movement speed, so you can get into that melee range a bit easier. But while you are concentrating, you cannot be knocked prone or moved against your will. That's pretty huge, because that means that things like grease, ice surfaces, if we're doing that sort of thing, they're not going to affect us. Steel Watchers can't knock us prone. Honestly, I hate fighting Steel Watchers. I've fought them so many times for testing. Like, there's a ton of different things and situations where this can come up, and it just synergizes quite nice with the build, and you get it so early on in Act 1 that I think it's just a good option throughout the whole game. But there are other options you could pick up, like the Boots of Speed, if you want to be able to dash as a bonus action, while also provoking disadvantage on opportunity attacks against you. Overall, pretty good for closing gaps or getting into range, whatever you want to do. And there's also the Boots of Elemental and Momentum. If you want to focus less on Eldritch Blast and more things like Firebolt, Ray of Frost, and such like that, this will also give you momentum, but it won't give you the protection from being prone, so I would personally recommend the Boots of Striding, but this also works quite nice. Next up, for our amulet, I've gone for the roleplay option, the Amulet of Ball, allowing us to inflict bleeding on targets that have maximum hit points. Again, if we're going down this like ball list, Dark Knight, Fallen Knight thing, then this would be quite a fun thing to go for, but realistically swap this out for whatever you like, including, perhaps as an early game option, the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation. Again, if you don't want to focus so much on Eldritch Blast, you want to augment your other elemental cantrips, go for this instead. This will work with Firebolt, Ray of Frost, Shocking Grasp, Acid Splash. It'll work with all of those, adding your spellcasting ability modifier to the damage dealt. So basically, Agonizing Blast for your elemental cantrips, which is going to feel quite strong, so you might actually prefer this to using Eldritch Blast instead. Who knows? But also, to go along with this, we've got the Ring of Arcane Synergy. Whenever you deal damage with a cantrip, you gain Arcane Synergy, which is going to add your spellcasting ability modifier to the damage dealt with weapons. So, if we use War Magic here, casting whatever cantrip we like as our action, our immediate next attack is going with that we use with our bonus action, thanks to War Magic, is going to get a massive buff to the damage. As well as on your next turn, you could go for your full 3 attacks, each being buffed by Arcane Synergy. And if you want to keep that rotation up, you can do it again on your next turn, cast and then attack, and then do 3 attacks the next turn, or you can go for the quick spell gloves to boost it up again. There's so many different ways you can go about using this ring, and it synergizes so nicely. There's also the Ring of Elemental Infusion. Again, if you're focusing less on the the Eldritch Blast stuff, you want to go for the elemental cantrips, then this will infuse your weapon with a d4 of damage equal to the element of the last cantrip you cast. So Ray of Frost is cold, and Firebolt is fire, obviously. It could be fun. It goes away after your next weapon attack, which kind of sucks, but hey, damage is damage, and it feels fun for the build. However, the ring I would absolutely recommend for this build, once you get to the late game, is the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. After hitting a creature with a weapon attack, you can cast illusion or enchantment spells as a bonus action. Attack once, cast Hold Person with your bonus action, guarantee critical hits for the rest, or Crown of Madness, or Tasha's, or whatever. You just have a ton of options here to just be an absolute demon on the battlefield. It is insane. I absolutely love this ring for this build. It gives you so much more flexibility. And again, this build has a lot of different ways you can do it, between the fighting styles, the different weapon options, the different equipment options. I think I've provided solid equipment throughout the whole game. As for like maybe like Act 1 weapon and armor options, any heavy armor will do, so just wear whatever, maybe even the adamantine armor if you want to go for Grim, whatever his fucking name is, and any decent weapon from Act 1 will also work. Just any good two-handed weapon I think would work really nice with this specific playstyle. You guys probably know at this point what to go for, but the Halberd of Vigilance you can get really early on into Act 2, but pretty much any weapon. Hell, the Sword of Justice would work perfectly for Act 1. There you go, the Sword of Justice. I don't know, I really, really like this playstyle. Is it as powerful as maybe going left-handed Warlock? Maybe not, I don't know, but again, that requires multi-classing into Thief Throw, which means you lose out on some higher level features, whereas with this, you just get to just mess about, do a bunch of attacks one turn, fire off some cantrips the next, and it'll all synergize really, really nicely. There are so many different equipment options to really make this build your own, and again, I know it's just go 12 levels of Eldritch Knight, it's not exactly complicated, but I feel like diving into the slightly deeper mechanics and how things are going to synergize does make a lot of sense. And again, things like Eldritch Strike and War Magic just working so nicely with the various spells that we're going to have access to just feels so great. And you even get, like, you can even go for like the Eldritch Blast critical thing as well if you really want to throw on the equipment for that. There's just so many different ways you can go about this build, and again, we managed to slip Great Weapon Master in there, which of course just takes the power level of this build to the next level, but that's not even really necessary if you don't want to go that route, if you feel like it makes things a little bit too dull. So just play around with it, find the things that you like, look at the feats, look at the options that you have, and just go absolutely crazy. I cannot recommend this build enough. Again, as much as it does have some complicated aspects to actually playing it, building it is quite simple. So I guess you could call this a beginner build, but I wouldn't really go that far. I mean, is there much else even really for me to say? I honestly don't know. I guess I will say this now. I was going to do a proper announcement video next week, just a quick little thing, but I am going to be taking a week or two off of YouTube. This next week, I'm recording this on the Friday, is going to be quite a, let's just say, busy time for me. So I'm not really going to be able to upload content so much. And I think since now that I've worked on these things for basically a year at this point, I do need to take a little bit of a break, just to kind of work some stuff out in my personal life, as well as, you know, get things back on track, as I'm going to be, my full-time job is starting up again in a couple of weeks' time. So I think I'm going to take a short break from YouTube. There may be some smaller uploads here or there if I feel like I want to do something, but I think I am just going to take a step back and just see what kind of happens to the channel if I do take a short break. It may be a week, it may be 2 weeks. I'll try not to make it longer than 2 weeks if I can help it, but who knows. So yeah, I'm going to take a short break from YouTube. I'll have a proper announcement video coming out on the Monday, just letting everyone know that that's what's happening. So I guess, really, this will probably be the last time I see you guys for a little while. Maybe there'll be a stream. Who knows? Probably won't have the time. But anyways, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.